Alright, today we're going to look at how the Renaissance actually impacted the Age of Discovery. Generally, a lot of lessons on the Age of Discovery just jump into discovery of North and South America as well as routes around Africa. There's a lot of focus on the actual deeds of going into these areas, conquering with conquistadors, Cortez, and so on and so forth. What I like to start off is with what provoked the action of actually going abroad. So the Renaissance is a good place to start. As mentioned in earlier videos, the Renaissance is a rediscovery of a lot of the writings from the ancient Greeks as well as ancient Romans for Europe itself. And so, with this discovery of these writings, a lot of what they rediscovered were there were manuals on military tactics, there were um, architectural aspects, for example, arches and domes, and that sort of thing. But also, what they discovered were ancient nautical descriptions and discovery of routes and sailing and what there was out there, because the ancient Greeks and Romans did encounter a lot of different cultures, and many of them actually went out and wrote about what they saw, and that was made into manuals of basically geography. And so with this rediscovery, they saw, or rather read, what was seen in the ancient world, and as a result, they decided they also wanted to look into these sorts of things. But many of the maps they were able to get out of many of these ancient writings were incomplete, and there were predictions on the circumference of the Earth and many different other mathematical features, and they described navigational techniques to figure out where you were in relation using the stars, for example. So there was a lot of information on getting out there and exploring. They also had different designs for ships, and many of their ships were mostly designed for Mediterranean travel, which many of the Europeans at this period of time had mastered or had designs already in place. But then what was going on at this time, in conjunction with this rediscovery, was a lot of the European states were actually reconsolidating their wealth and their power. So places like England and France, which had just fought 100 Years' War, and they were continuing on with their lives after that event. Kings were, and in some cases queens, were trying to consolidate their power within their own countries, expand their tax base to get more wealth, and they had done a fairly successful job moving away from a feudal system where the kings were weak to now the kings were being strong. And so they had a lot of disposable wealth to use on themselves for parties, armies, and that sort of thing, but they also had disposable wealth to use to increase their status in Europe. And there was that competition going on throughout Europe pretty much since the beginning of time. So with this competition, they wanted to use that money to expand their status in Europe with their competitors and put them in a stronger position than one another. So one of those means was to then go abroad. Now, part of this was insinuated by their lust for luxury goods, and some of these luxury goods are going to be spices, like salt and pepper and various other spices that you can find in anyone's kitchen today. So they wanted certainly some of these spices to make their food taste less bland, but also preservation techniques as well. And so with the shortage of spices, and this is in part due to the Crusades, through the Crusades, many of the lords, nobles, as well as kings went to the Crusades to fight against the Muslims in Egypt and various other different locations that we consider modern-day Israel, and those various places of the Middle East. Due to interactions with the Crusades, the Muslims didn't much care for the Europeans, And so they generally controlled supplies of a lot of the goods coming in from India and China. And so they decided to cut off trade with the Europeans. As a result, the Europeans were unable to get a lot of the salt and pepper and various other different spices that they normally would be able to get. Now, the Italians were able to get access to this because they did have friendly relations. They didn't essentially just cut off any European whatsoever. They were friendly with some Europeans. And so with some of this interaction with the Muslims, they were able to borrow some of their ship designs. They were also able to borrow some of the products that they were purchasing. And so they were able to bring back some of that technology and spices to the European nobles and kings. But they wanted more, and they certainly didn't want to pay the exorbitant prices that the Muslims were charging the European kings and nobles and anyone else who was able to actually afford some of this spices and other products. And so this motivated a lot of the kings to try produce some sort of monopoly over some of these products. And so they encouraged individuals to use this newfound navigational techniques, these newfound ships, which the Europeans combined the Mediterranean as well as the more transatlantic type of techniques and put it all into one boat. So with the borrowing of the techniques that they had learned, as well as some of the borrowing of the techniques that the Muslim ships were designed around, they were able to build an all-purpose ship called the Caravel. And so the kings actually encouraged people to go abroad to find access to these resources. And so with their money to fund ships, for example, Christopher Columbus would not have been able to actually sail from Spain to what he thought was China, but was actually some islands off the coast of the Americas. He would not have been able to do that if the Spanish king and queen, Ferdinand and Isabella, were encouraged to throw money into this problem. And so English and French and Spanish and Portuguese, as well as the Italians, started funding ships to start explore abroad. Now, the Spanish and Portuguese were at the forefront of this, in part due to Henry the Navigator, who was a prince who produced a school which many of the explorers would attend for the basics of navigation, and they did learn some of these ancient techniques that were rediscovered during this period of time. And so, as a result, due to this want for wealth as well as luxury goods, they started to explore with the king's and queen's money, as well as merchants coming together to form their own joint stock company to fund essentially trips out abroad. They started exploring down around Africa, eventually making ports along Africa and eventually towards India. And so they had the ability to actually bring back a lot of the resources, whether it be spices or something else, back to Europe. And so a lot of these merchants became very, very wealthy by doing so. And so as a result, you saw a lot of these spices coming over. But going from, say, Spain to India around Africa was a very long and dangerous journey. They wanted to make that quicker, and so some individuals like Christopher Columbus decided to go the other direction and go sailing all the way west, but unfortunately, unbeknownst to them, North and South America was in the way. But they were able to find quite a few resources there, which many of these countries are going to benefit from. The potatoes, for example. But the Columbian Exchange is a whole different topic, which I'll leave for a later point. So a lot of wealth, capitalist sort of motivations, mercantilism, the want for wealth, profit, that's certainly going to motivate a lot of people to go abroad and obtain some of those resources. I already mentioned the Crusades was a motivating factor, as it did restrict some of the trade with the Middle East, restricting access to India and Chinese markets. But in Spain, for example, and to some respect Portugal. They were still in the midst of a crusade themselves. They've been trying to kick out the Muslims in that part of the world since they invaded in the 700s. They're actually going to be successful in 1492. And so they still have this fervor of crusades, which kind of died away in much of the rest of Europe. But they were encouraged to convert the populations in Africa as well as North and South America. So crusades is going to be a big additional ingredient to this age of discovery going out to North and South America. They still have this mentality of the Crusades converting what they might call infidels to the Catholic faith. And then finally, there's this aspect of adventure, and it's still at the heart of the human race today. People want to see new things, explore new things, experience new things, and that hadn't changed at this period of time. They could stay home and work on the farm, or they could join a company and get on a ship and explore potentially one of the Americas or sail across Africa and get very wealthy in the process, hopefully. They've been hearing stories. You get some of your first novels on some of these adventure stories of people like Marco Polo, Christopher Columbus, some of these adventures from various other different famous figures going abroad. And that is going to draw people to be enticed to go overseas, experience some of this new adventure, and then come home and start a business or live out the rest of their days if they survive this process. It was all very dangerous, but it still enticed people to explore the unknown, and that has existed from the beginning of time. What you see with the Age of Discovery, you see with the final frontier of space as well. Those are some of the factors which the Renaissance directly relates to the Age of Discovery, and certainly the globalization of the world. Thank you.